In this episode of Stories and Sips, we're going to delve deep into the past to discover the Hollywood-esque story of an American, his Irish castle, and the legacy of the incredible whiskies he left behind, 3 of which I'll sip tonight. These 3 single malts of distinction from Knappogue Castle. Welcome to episode number 23 of Stories and Sips. I'm Barry Chandler, an Irishman in America, spreading the good word of Ireland and its whiskies to everyone who listen and even those who won't. If you haven't already subscribed to my weekly episodes, they're free, and you want to be the first to be notified of every new episode, you can do so on YouTube by clicking on the subscribe link underneath this video. Now, before we pour the whiskey, let's have a little history lesson, shall we? And where better to start than at the very beginning. This is Knappogue Castle in County Clare, an Irish tower house. Simply put, it's a house with a tower, and it was pretty typical of medieval times in Ireland when the local nobility needed some good defences to keep out the marauding masses, the British, amongst others. The castle was built in 1467, which, as a matter of interest to my American viewers, was 25 years before Christopher Columbus reached the shores of America. Now, Knappogue Castle has had its fair share of owners over the centuries. Earls, high sheriffs and barons all kept the castle in a pretty decent state of repair until at the end of the 1920s, ownership of the property was acquired by a farming family and the building entered a sad phase of deterioration. Now, you'll find ruins of tower houses all over Ireland, but you'll be pleased to know Knappogue Castle isn't one of them. But it was hardly surprising then that some serious renovation work was in order when Texan Mark Andrews returned to the land of his ancestors and purchased Knappogue Castle in 1966, 1 year short of its 500th birthday. Now, I've got to think that that's up there on the list of dreams of Americans with Irish ancestry, to go back to the old country and buy a castle. And during the years of restoration work Mark Andrews and his architect wife undertook at the castle, Mark began to put the castle cellars to good use. As the Irish whisky industry declined and demand dried up globally, there were deals to be had on wholesale whisky around Ireland. And Mark bought a goodly load of casks of first-class pot still whisky from the old Tullamore Dew distillery in County Offaly, and he left them in the cellar of Knappogue Castle to age before bottling them with his own Knappogue Castle label. His greatest treasure was the purchase of a whisky distilled in 1951, which was then left to age in old Oloroso sherry barrels for 3.5 decades until it was bottled in 1987. Imagine that, 36 years in sherry casks, unheard of in the Irish whisky world. The Knappogue Castle Vintage 1951 sherry cask aged whisky is a rarity, and one the likes of you or I will maybe never even get a sniff of, let alone get to taste, but it's good to know it's out there somewhere in existence and being sipped upon by maybe kings and queens or just those who got a good deal back in the day. In the meantime, there's a lot to be said for the Knappogue Castle 12, 14 and 16-year-old single malts, which are a lot easier to acquire, and I have them right here in front of me. Now, the Knappogue Castle 12-year-old is their signature expression, and it's a single malt made exclusively, 100% from malted barley. Let's have a little pour of that in there, shall we? You can notice there's a lovely straw colour to that whiskey. Take a nose. And it's bottled at 40% ABV, like a biscuit quality. There's a richness and a real biscuity quality from the aroma. And then to taste it, it's very soft, lightly spicy, definitely the vanilla essence that you're getting from the bourbon casks. It's a very easy to drink whiskey. And incidentally, this 12-year-old is the first age statement whiskey to come out of Knappogue Castle, which means it's the first whiskey that actually has the age of the whiskey on it. That's a lovely soft whiskey, easy to drink. Let's move on to the 14-year-old here. So the Knappogue Castle 14-year-old is what they're calling twin wood, which really is just the result of the marriage of 2 different types of, well, single malt that's been aged in 2 different types of wood. In this case, bourbon barrels and Oloroso sherry casks. And the addition of the sherry to the equation means it develops like a drier and nuttier taste, which is unmistakable really, even on the nose. There's a sweetness, it's a little bit more complex than the 12-year-old. And this one's bottled at 46%, so it's slightly higher alcohol by volume. And that's in and around my favourite range for whiskies at 46%. Definitely there's a fruity maltiness to this 14-year-old. Again, a very easy to drink whiskey, slightly darker in colour. And then moving on to the 16-year-old, which is the darkest of them all. I hope you see my Tua glass here, the Irish whiskey glass. This one's got a nice gold rim to it. Saving that one for last for the 16-year-old. Pouring that in there, nice little taste of each for me tonight. So the Knappogue Castle 16-year-old, this one spends 14 years in bourbon casks, and then it's transferred to sherry casks to finish its aging process. Now anywhere from 2 years to maybe a little bit more. And this one is bottled at 40%. Definitely get the maltiness. You can definitely get there's a fruitiness to that, and definitely a richer aroma. And surprisingly mellow. The sherry tones come out, the sweetness. And now the length of it is a little bit more complex, the longer it stays on the tongue and as you put it around your mouth. But that aroma is, you can get that extra age, the extra couple of years really comes out in that 16-year-old. A lovely range of whiskies there, and you'll find a special release every now and again as well, like the Knappogue Castle 21-year-old, which is currently for sale. Now, while you'll find the whiskies widely available in the United States, once you've tried them, the natural next step, of course, is to visit the castle that adorns this little label here on the bottle. Add this part of Ireland to your list of spots to visit on your trip. Now, distillation doesn't happen at the castle, but rather in the northeast of Ireland, so don't go looking for a distillery in the grounds, but the castle is situated in a beautiful part of the country on the outskirts of the village of Quin in County Clare, just 25 minutes drive from Shannon Airport, or a single flight out of New York. And if you do want to experience living in Knappogue Castle, well, you can. Shannon Heritage, who now manage the castle, offer its stateroom style apartments for rent on Airbnb. So you can rent it out. You can rent out the castle, and you can take selfies on the grounds and tell all your friends that you drank Knappogue in Knappogue. A bucket list item checked off for you. But if you're not staying there, then visits are limited to evenings only, but you can easily make the most of a day in County Clare while waiting for the castle to open, and there's no shortage of great things to do nearby. An hour from Knappogue Castle is one of Ireland's oldest cave systems, the Allowee Caves, and at Allowee you can go underground and walk for half an hour through the karst landscape of stalagmites and stalactites and waterfalls, and it's an impressive sight, and it was a favourite spot for our school tours when we were younger. And if you want to see the past come to life before your very eyes, then you'll want to pay a visit to the Bunratty Castle and Folk Park in the village of Bunratty, just 15 minutes drive from Knappogue Castle. And the 15th century fortress is surrounded by a time warp of 19th century streets where live reenactments take place, and you'll be transported to an Ireland you never thought you'd have a chance to see. From the old post office to the old printworks and right down to the village pub. There's even the smell of peat in the fireplaces when you walk through those little buildings. It's amazing. It's a pretty authentic demonstration of how life really was in Ireland and still is in some parts. And when I worked in Adair Manor years ago, which was about a 45-minute drive from Bunratty Castle, I remember a guest coming to the front desk where I was working to tell me about her trip to Bunratty Castle. Lovely place, she said, but tell me this, why do they build it so close to the motorway? More or less wherever you turn in County Clare, you'll find a ruin of some description or other. It might be a tower house, a castle, a monastery, or even a Stone Age grave. The one thing they all go to show is that some things, like Knappogue Castle, get better with age, and others don't stand the test of time quite so well. Sláinte.